I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA Karen's prince tied my 14-year-old to a tree during a storm, and the excuse he gave, he said it was just a small prank. Funny thing is, the only thing tested that night was my restraint, because her father's military training doesn't do wait and see. Let me start from the beginning. Before diving in, let me know where you're listening from today. Name's Nate Walker. When things explode, I get quieter. It's a tool I learned to use a long time ago. Keep it steady, keep it low, and you can walk through a fire without getting burned. My wife, Heather, she's the smart one. She sees the whole chessboard, every move 5 steps ahead. And my daughter, Isabel, she's brave. She's my stepdaughter, technically. But that word means nothing when you love someone. She's mine. She's got a spine of steel and a heart that won't quit. We lived in a place called Birchfield Meadows. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Like a postcard. Green lawns, friendly waves, a community pool. But every postcard has a back, and on the back of ours was the Homeowners Association run by a woman named Karen Goodson. Karen wasn't just a president. She was a queen on a throne made of vinyl siding and petty regulations. She wrote violation notices the way pirates write ransom notes, gleeful, misspelled, and fast. Her son, Brody, was her little prince, a blue and yellow varsity jacket stuffed with arrogance and his mother's sense of untouchability. It all started on a Tuesday night in October. A storm was tearing through Ohio, the kind that makes the sky look purple-black. Wind howled, rain knifed sideways, and the cottonwood windmilled like it wanted hazard pay. Isabel was supposed to be at a friend's house, just 2 streets over, working on a school project. She was 14. At that age, a storm is an adventure. For parents, it's a knot in your stomach. Her curfew was 9. At 9:15, Heather was already looking at her phone. "She's not answering my texts," she said, her voice tight. I told her Isabel probably just had her phone on silent. Teenagers. But I felt it too, that low thrum of wrongness. At 9:30, my phone buzzed. It was Isabel. I hit the speaker button. Her voice was small, broken by the wind and chattering teeth. "Nate, I'm in the field." Behind the house, I was already on my feet, pulling on my boots. Heather was right behind me, grabbing 2 heavy flashlights from the utility closet. "What's wrong, Izzy? Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. There was a sob on the other end of the line. "He tied me to the tree. Brody, him and his friends. They just left me here." The words hit me like a physical blow. Tied her to the tree, the big cottonwood, in this storm. The rage that surged through me was white hot, a blinding flash of pure, unadulterated fury. But the calm took over. It had to. Panic wouldn't help her. I grabbed my multi-tool. Heather was already tapping 911. "We're coming, Isabel. Just hold on. We're coming right now." I gave our address in the tree. She stayed with the dispatcher while we ran. I hung up and looked at Heather. Her face was a mask of stone, her eyes blazing. She didn't need to say a word. We burst out the back door into the roaring chaos. The wind shoved me back, and the rain felt like tiny needles on my face. Our flashlights cut uselessly through the deluge, the beams swallowed by the darkness just a few feet away. We knew the path. We stumbled through the mud and the whipping grass of the common area, a stretch of land that separated the rows of houses. The cottonwood was a massive dark shape against the churning gray sky. As we got closer, my light caught something, a flicker of color, her blue jacket. She was there, plastered against the rough bark of the tree, her arms stretched around it. Thick, fibrous rope was wrapped around her wrists, her chest, her waist, pinning her to the trunk. "The bark is eating me," she chattered. "Spit it out, tree," I said, wedging my shoulder against the trunk. Lightning stitched the sky. Heather snapped, "Knife, Nate, high knot first." "Copy." The rope fought back. Wind threw rain in our eyes. Isabel tried to laugh and failed. "Next time, text me no trees." "Deal," I said, and cut the last strand. Her hair was soaked and stuck to her face, and she was shivering so hard the whole tree seemed to vibrate with her. Heather got to her first, her hands fumbling with the wet, tight knots. "Oh, baby." "Oh my God." Isabel was crying, silent tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue. I pulled out the multi-tool I always carry, flicking open the small, serrated blade. "Hold still, Izzy." "I'm trying," she chattered. "Tree's not cooperating," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I sawed at the ropes, the tough fibers resisting with a stubbornness that felt personal. Each strand that snapped was a small victory against the monster who had done this. Brody Goodson. I could see his smug, empty face in my mind. He'd been a problem for years, a low-grade bully protected by his mother's power. But this was something else entirely. This was a different kind of cruel. The last rope fell away, and Isabel collapsed into Heather's arms, sobbing. We wrapped her in the jacket I was wearing and started the slow, difficult walk back to the house. As we reached the edge of our yard, I glanced back at the field. For a second, through the sheets of rain, I thought I saw them. A group of figures standing at the far end of the field, just watching. Then they were gone. I got Isabel inside, wrapped her in blankets, and started making her hot chocolate. My hands were shaking, but my mind was eerily clear. This wasn't over. It was opening bell. And in our house, you don't declare war without expecting a response. What I didn't know then was that Isabel, shivering and terrified, had already made 2 more calls from that tree. 1 to 911 and 1 to her father. And her father wasn't like me. He wasn't calm. He was a storm all on his own, and he was already on his way. Heather gripped the counter. "If Mark swings, Karen spins it." "I know." "Then we don't blink," she said. "You film, I call, we control the record." I lifted the phone camera, hands steady, voice steadier. "We write it as it happens." The call came while Heather was helping Isabel into a hot shower. The phone rang, and the caller ID just said, "Mark." My stomach tightened. Mark was Heather's ex-husband, Isabel's biological father. He was a good man, in his own way, but he was a hammer and saw every problem as a nail. He'd spent 20 years in Delta Force, the sharp end of the spear, and it had forged him into something hard and unyielding. He loved Isabel fiercely, a possessive, primal kind of love that always put me on edge. I answered the phone. "Nate," I said, my voice flat. "Where is she?" His voice was gravel, with no room for pleasantries. "She's home. She's safe. She's cold, but she's okay." I could hear the engine of his truck roaring in the background. He was driving fast. "What happened?" he demanded. I gave him the short version, the storm, Brody Goodson and his friends, the rope, the tree, silence on his end. It was the kind of silence that's louder than a scream. "Nate," he said finally, his voice dangerously low. "Keep her inside. Lock the doors. I'm 10 minutes out." 10 minutes is forever in a storm. For Mark, it's 2 songs and a bad idea. Before I could tell him that the police were on their way, that we should let them handle it, he hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, the warmth of the house feeling like a fragile bubble about to burst. Heather came downstairs, her face pale. "Who was that?" "Mark," I said. "He's coming." The look on her face said it all. She knew what I knew. Mark coming wasn't about comfort or support. It was about retribution. Isabel, wrapped in a thick robe, sat on the couch, sipping her hot chocolate. The color was starting to come back to her cheeks, but her eyes were still wide with shock. She told us everything. How Brody and his 2 varsity football friends had cornered her on her way home. They said it was a joke, a prank for an old social media post she'd made that they didn't like. They laughed as they tied her up, filming it with their phones. They told her they'd be back in an hour. They lied. She was out there for nearly 90 minutes. Her phone had been in her jacket pocket. She'd managed to wriggle it out. She called Heather first, but the call didn't go through. Signal was bad in the storm, so she called 911. The dispatcher promised to send a car, but said it might be a while because of the weather. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line, but her hands were so cold, so numb, that she dropped the phone in the mud. Panicked, she managed to pick it up, her fingers barely working. She knew she had 1 more call in her before her hands gave out completely. She didn't call me. She didn't call Heather again. She speed-dialed her dad. She just said 1 word. "Dad." Right call. Sometimes stepdad is chapter 2. Call your dad is chapter 1. If I'd been on that line, I'd have said the same. He knew her voice. He knew her pain. He just said, "Where are you, Izzy?" She told him, "The Cottonwood." And the phone slipped from her grasp for good. It was then that my call came through. We heard the rumble of his truck a few minutes later. It wasn't just the engine, it was the way he drove it, with an aggression that announced his arrival long before you saw the headlights. A pair of flashing blue and red lights appeared at the end of the street at the same time. A sheriff's deputy, finally, but Mark got there first. His oversized Ford F-250 screeched to a halt in front of the Goodsons' house, 2 doors down. Karen Goodson's house was, of course, the biggest one on the block, a monument to her self-importance. The deputy pulled in behind him, slower, more cautious. I watched from our front window, a terrible feeling washing over me. "Stay here," I told Heather. I ran out the front door, not even grabbing a jacket, the cold rain soaking me instantly. This was going to go bad, and I had to at least try to stop it. Mark was already out of his truck. He's not a big man, but he moves with an unnerving purpose, a compact bundle of coiled muscle and violent intent. He didn't bother with the walkway. He strode across the perfectly manicured lawn, his boots sinking into the sodden grass. The front door of the Goodson house opened, and Brody stepped out onto the porch, a smirk on his face. He was flanked by his mother, Karen, who had her arms crossed, looking indignant. "Can I help you?" "Boys will be boys, Mr. Walker." "Maybe your girl should learn consequences," Karen asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Mark didn't answer her. His eyes were locked on Brody. "You put your hands on my daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Brody's smirk faltered. "It was just a joke, man." A prank. That was the wrong thing to say. I saw the shift in Mark's shoulders, the slight drop of his center of gravity. I started running toward them, shouting his name. "Mark, don't! The cops are here." The deputy was getting out of his car, his hand resting on his service weapon. But he was too far away. Mark moved. It was brutally fast. He closed the distance in 2 quick strides, his left hand shooting out to grab the front of Brody's jacket, yanking him off the porch. Brody stumbled forward, his eyes wide with shock. Mark's right fist came up from his hip, a short, powerful, piston-like motion. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a precise, targeted strike that landed squarely on Brody's jaw. There was a sickening crack that I heard even over the rain. Brody's head snapped to the side, and he went down like a sack of bricks, unconscious before he even hit the wet grass. Karen screamed, a shrill, piercing sound. One of Brody's friends, who had come out behind him, made a move toward Mark. Mark didn't even look at him. He spun, grabbing the kid's outstretched arm, twisting it behind his back in a way arms aren't meant to bend. The kid shrieked in pain. The deputy was there then, gun drawn, shouting. Red-blue strobes painted the rain. The muzzle tracked like a metronome on a bad song. "On the ground! Now! Hands behind your back!" Mark let go of the kid's arm and slowly, deliberately, turned to face the deputy. He raised his hands, his face completely devoid of emotion. He looked calm, almost serene, as if he had just completed a simple, necessary task. He didn't resist as the deputy pushed him against the side of his truck and cuffed him. He just looked past the deputy, past Karen, who was now kneeling over her son, and his eyes met mine. He gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was a message. I did my part. Now you do yours. As they put him in the back of the patrol car, Karen stood up, her face twisted with rage and something else, triumph. She pointed a trembling finger at Mark, then at me. "You'll pay for this. All of you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I knew then that this wasn't just about a schoolyard grudge anymore. This was about power, and Karen Goodson had just seen the perfect opportunity to use hers. The question that echoed in my head as the patrol car pulled away was the one Mark's actions had just posed for all of us. How far is too far? Mark had given his answer. Now it was my turn to find mine. The night was a blur of flashing lights, statements to the sheriff's deputies, and the cold, bureaucratic process of the law grinding into motion. Brody was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. The initial report was a broken jaw and a concussion. His friend had a sprained wrist. Mark was taken to the county detention center, charged with 2 counts of felony assault. Karen Goodson made sure of that. She stood on her lawn, under an umbrella held by her shaken but compliant husband, directing the scene like a movie director, her voice sharp and vindictive. She painted a picture of a deranged ex-military lunatic launching an unprovoked attack on innocent teenagers. She conveniently left out the part about the tree, the ropes, and the storm. When we told the deputies our side, they listened patiently, took notes, and told us it was a he said, she said situation now, and Mark's very visible, very public actions were the primary facts of the case. He had crossed a line. He had used violence. And in the neat, tidy world of suburban law and order, that made him the bad guy. Courts don't grade motives, just impacts. Jawbreaks? F-. Heather called a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in this kind of mess. The news wasn't good. Given Mark's background and the severity of the injuries, they were going to hold him without bail until his arraignment. He was a flight risk, they'd say, a danger to the community. It was nonsense, but it was the kind of nonsense that sticks. We spent the rest of the night trying to calm Isabel down, assuring her that it wasn't her fault, that her dad did what he thought was right. But I could see the guilt in her eyes. She felt responsible. She had made the call, and now her father was in a cage. I felt a different kind of guilt. I had stood there and watched. I had tried to stop him with words, but I hadn't been fast enough, hadn't been forceful enough. My way, the calm way, had failed. His way, the violent way, had worked in the short term. Brody was down. But the consequences were a disaster. We were trapped between two extremes, and Karen Goodson was dancing in the middle. We didn't sleep that night. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep on the lawn. Every creak of the house was a threat. The feeling of safety we'd once had in our home was gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The next 2 days were a tense, quiet hell. The neighborhood was buzzing. We could feel the eyes on us when we checked the mail. Whispers followed us. Karen Goodson had been busy. She'd sent out a neighborhood-wide email from the official HOA account, detailing a violent assault on a neighborhood child by an unstable outsider. She described Mark as a menace and warned residents to be vigilant. She was controlling the narrative, painting us as the villains. Our friends called, offering support, but many of our neighbors grew cold, distant. They didn't want to get involved. They were afraid of Karen. She had a long history of making life difficult for people who crossed her, using the HOA's labyrinthine rules to levy fines and liens for the smallest infractions. She wielded her petty power like a weapon, and most people found it easier to just keep their heads down. The harassment started small. Our morning paper was thrown into a puddle. A bag of dog waste was left on our doorstep. Annoying, childish things. We ignored them. We were focused on Mark, on the legal battle ahead. We were trying to hold our family together. The third night, it escalated. It was just after midnight. The house was dark and quiet. Isabel was finally asleep, though not soundly. She'd been having nightmares. Heather and I were lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when we heard it. A sharp, percussive thwump, followed by the explosive shatter of glass. We both shot out of bed. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I grabbed the heavy maglite I keep by the bed and ran toward Isabel's room, Heather right behind me. Her room was at the front of the house. The window was a spider web of broken glass, a gaping hole in the center. A cold breeze was blowing in, carrying the smell of wet leaves. On her floor, amidst the glittering shards of glass, was a brick. Tied around it with a shoelace was a wet, muddy piece of rope, the same kind they had used to tie her to the tree. Isabel was sitting bolt upright in her bed, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't screaming. She was just staring at the broken window, at the brick, at the piece of rope. It was a message. We know where you sleep. We can get to you. I called 911 again. A different deputy came this time. He was young, looked bored. He took our statement, shone his flashlight around the yard, and found nothing. No footprints he could make out, no witnesses. He logged the incident as vandalism. Probably just some kids, he said with a shrug. Happens all the time. I held up the brick with the rope. This isn't just kids, officer. This is targeted harassment. This is witness intimidation. He just sighed. You can file a report, sir, but without any evidence of who did it, there's not much we can do. He handed me a card with a case number on it and left. His name badge was crooked. Felt right. I turned the card over like it might hatch a detective. Nothing. Across the street, a porch light flicked on, then off. The universal signal for not getting involved, sorry. Heather set the broom down. We'll involve them with facts. Good, I said. Facts don't sleep. Great, souvenir paperwork. I stared at the rope and promised it a refund. I stood there in my daughter's trashed room, the useless piece of paper in my hand, and I felt that same white-hot rage I'd felt in the field. But this time, it was different. It was cold, calculated. Mark's way had failed. The system's way had failed. Fine. It was time for my way. Heather was already sweeping up the glass, her movements quick and efficient. Her face was set, determined. She looked at me over the sound of the broom. "We need a record of everything, Nate." "Everything." I nodded. I went to my office and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top of the page, I wrote the date, the time, and the incident. Brick through Isabel's window. This was the first entry in what would become our harassment log. It was page 1 of a new playbook. They wanted a war? Fine. But we weren't going to fight it with fists or bricks. We were going to fight it with facts, with data, with irrefutable proof. The calm wasn't weakness anymore. It was my weapon. And I was just starting to sharpen it. Then came the drip. Pizzas at 3 a.m., doxing, slow roll-bys. A toy noose on our mailbox one morning. Yellow, cheerful, foul. We logged it all. We needed proof that bites. Our first break came from an unlikely source. Uncle Dan. He wasn't really our uncle. He was our neighbor from across the street. Dan was a retired Army Signal Corps guy in his late 60s. A quiet widower who spent most of his time tinkering with electronics in his garage. He'd seen the commotion the night Mark was arrested, and he'd seen the deputy leaving after the brick incident. He came over the next morning with a plate of cookies and a worried look on his face. "Nate, Heather," he said, setting the plate on the counter, "I don't like what I'm seeing. Karen's been a tyrant for years, but this is different." We told him everything. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed. When we got to the part about needing proof, his eyes lit up with a familiar spark, the look of a man who sees a problem he knows how to solve. "The pool house," he said, almost to himself. "The security system. Karen had it installed last year, top-of-the-line stuff. Said it was to deter vandalism. The Birchfield Meadows community pool and clubhouse were Karen's pride and joy. She'd overseen the renovation herself, and she guarded it like a fortress. The recorder for the cameras is in the maintenance closet," Dan continued. "It's all digital. It records on a loop to a massive hard drive. If Brody and his buddies were in the common area that night, the camera on the back of the building might have caught them." A plan started to form, a risky one. The pool was closed for the season. Getting into the maintenance closet wouldn't be easy. "The lock is a simple keypad," Dan said, a small smile playing on his lips. "And our dear president isn't exactly a cybersecurity expert. The default code is usually 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 or 0-0-0-0. But I saw the installer last year. I saw the code he punched in to test it. He wrote it on the inside of the manual. People are creatures of habit. The idea was simple. Dan would keep watch. I would slip over late at night, access the closet, and use a portable hard drive cloner to make an exact copy of the security system's drive. It would take a few hours, but it was our best shot. Heather was hesitant. "Nate, this is breaking and entering, if we get caught." "What other choice do we have?" I countered. "We're being hunted, and no one will help us. We have to help ourselves." She knew I was right. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, we put the plan into action. Dan sat in his darkened living room, watching the street with a pair of night vision binoculars he'd kept from his service days. I dressed in black, a small backpack with my laptop, and the cloning device on my back. I felt like a character in a spy movie, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The code Dan gave me worked. The lock beeped softly and the door to the maintenance closet swung open. It was dark and smelled of chlorine and damp concrete. I found the security recorder, a black metal box with a fan humming quietly inside. I got to work, my flashlight clenched in my teeth, my fingers flying as I connected the cloner. The device whirred to life, a small progress bar glowing on its screen. It was going to take 3 hours. Dan texted, "Binocs on, street clear." I replied, "Heart loud, chlorine louder." At 41%, a door thumped somewhere in the building. My lungs forgot how. A vending machine whirred to life like a chainsaw serenade. Dan again, "Just ice maker. Also, I owe you cookies." "Make them legal," I whispered, and watched the bar crawl to 100%. Halfway through, a cruiser idled outside. I forgot how to breathe and remembered how to pray. Finally, the cloner beeped. The copy was complete. I packed everything up, wiped down every surface I had touched, and slipped back out into the night. Back in our kitchen, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, Dan, Heather, and I huddled around my laptop. We plugged in the clone drive. Files and folders bloomed on the screen, a chaotic mess of time-stamped video feeds. It took us an hour of searching, but then we found it. The camera on the back of the pool house. The angle was perfect. It covered the entire common area, including the old cottonwood tree. We found the footage from the night of the storm. The video was grainy, distorted by the rain, but it was undeniable. We saw Brody and two other boys dragging Isabel into the frame. We saw them laughing as they wrapped the ropes around her and the tree. Their blue and yellow varsity jackets pop, even in rain. We saw them pull out their phones and film her. We saw them walk away, leaving her there. The timestamp in the corner was a prosecutor's dream. It showed them leaving her a full 93 minutes before we arrived. It was the proof we needed. "We got them," Heather whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. But Dan was still clicking, his expression grim. "Wait a minute," he said. "There's more here than just the pool cameras. Look at these file names." He pointed to a series of folders labeled with street names. Our street name was there. He clicked on it. A new video window opened. My blood ran cold. I was looking at a live feed of Dan's own front porch. He clicked another file. It was the house next to his. Another click. It was our house. A clear, high-definition shot of our front door, our driveway, our walkway. The camera was hidden somewhere across the street. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dan navigated back to the main directory. There were dozens of these folders, dozens of hidden cameras, all over the neighborhood, all feeding back to this one recorder in the pool house closet. Karen Goodson wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was running her own private surveillance state. And then we found the other partition on the drive. It wasn't video. It was an email archive. Her emails synced from her computer to this server. We found the email she sent to the neighborhood, slandering Mark. And then we found the one that made me physically sick. Another thread had Karen labeling families problem units. We were Unit 7B, needs pressure. It was an email from Karen to her son, sent the day before the storm. The subject line was, Isabel Walker. The body of the email was short and chilling. "Brody, it's time that girl learned a lesson about respecting her elders. Be smart about it. Make sure she understands. We weren't just looking at evidence of a crime anymore. We were looking at the mind of a monster, and we had her dead to rights." The discovery of Karen's spy network changed the game completely. This was bigger than Brody and a cruel prank. This was systematic, illegal surveillance. This was a stunning abuse of power. We sat there in the pale glow of the laptop screen, the weight of what we'd found settling on us. We had evidence that could not only clear Mark's name, but could bring down Karen Goodson and her entire rotten empire. But we had obtained it illegally. If we just handed this drive over to the sheriff, we could be charged ourselves. The evidence might be thrown out. We were walking a tightrope. Heather, ever the strategist, laid out our options. "We can't use the footage of the other houses," she said, her voice low and steady. "That's the fruit of the poisonous tree. But the footage of Isabel in the common area? That's from an official HOA camera. We have a right to that as members. The email from Karen to Brody? That's the smoking gun that proves intent." We decided to play it carefully. We would use the evidence of the attack on Isabel and the incriminating email, and we would hold the surveillance network in our back pocket as an ace up our sleeve. We set the fuse and hid the match. The first step was to protect our daughter. The next morning, Heather and I, with Isabel between us, went to the county courthouse. We sat with a victim's advocate, a kind woman with tired eyes who had seen it all. We laid out the timeline of harassment, the drive-bys, the stalking at the skate park, the online doxing, the brick through the window. We didn't mention the video yet. We just presented the log I had been keeping, a detailed, dispassionate account of their campaign of terror. The judge granted an emergency temporary protection order against Brody Goodson. He was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of Isabel, our house, our cars, or her school. He couldn't contact her or encourage anyone else to contact her in any way. The order barred agents too. It was a piece of paper, but it was a powerful one. If he violated it, He would be arrested immediately. No questions asked. We knew he wouldn't be able to resist. Brody's arrogance was his weakness. We just had to give him an opportunity to show it. Isabel was a skater. Her skateboard was her escape, the one place she felt free. Brody knew this. He and his friends were often at the same public skate park. Since the protection order, she hadn't been back. She was too scared. I saw the toll it was taking on her, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. I couldn't let them take that from her, too. So, we devised a plan, a trap, a legal airtight trap. Uncle Dan provided the technology. It was a simple AirTag, the kind you use to find your keys, but Dan, with his Signal Corps background, modified it. He disabled the speaker that would alert someone they were being tracked and boosted its signal range. It was small, no bigger than a quarter. I took one of Isabel's old beaten-up skateboard decks from the garage. It was one she didn't use anymore, covered in stickers and scratches. I carefully routed out a small cavity on the underside, set the AirTag inside, and covered it with a new sticker. It was invisible. This was our decoy, our bait. The next Saturday was a bright, sunny afternoon. I drove Isabel to the skate park. She was nervous. "Dad, what if he shows up?" she asked, twisting her hands in her lap. "That's the point, Izzy," I said gently. "We have the protection order. He can't come near you, but if he does something stupid, we need to be able to prove it." I handed her the decoy board. "Just leave this near the bench when you're skating. If someone takes it, they take it. No big deal." Heather was parked a block away, watching the entrance to the park. I was in our car on the opposite side, with my laptop open, a map showing the location of the little blue dot that was our AirTag. Isabel took a deep breath, grabbed the board, and walked into the park. She was so brave. "If I fall, I'm blaming gravity," she said. "Fair," I said. She started skating, a little wobbly at first, then finding her rhythm. For 20 minutes, everything was normal. Then, a familiar black pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Brody. He got out with one of his friends. He saw Isabel. He stopped, and I could see them talking, his friend pointing. The protection order was working. He was staying outside the 500-foot perimeter. But he was watching her. Then he spoke to his friend again, and the friend started walking into the park, heading straight for the bench where Isabel had left the decoy board. This was the gray area of the order. Brody couldn't encourage anyone else to act on his behalf, but proving that was nearly impossible. His friend, a lanky kid named Kevin, sauntered over to the bench. He looked around, then casually picked up the board and tucked it under his arm. He walked back to the truck, got in, and they drove away. On my laptop screen, I watched the blue dot start to move. It went down the main road, turned into our subdivision, and kept going. It didn't stop at Brody's house. It went straight to the community clubhouse. The dot stopped moving. It was inside the pool house. I called Heather. "They have it. It's at the clubhouse. We had him." He had violated the order by proxy, and now he had stolen property in his possession, stored on HOA grounds. I called the sheriff's department. I gave them the protection order number and explained the situation. I told them we had a tracking device on the stolen property and that it was currently located inside the HOA clubhouse. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, but the existence of the tracking device was concrete. They agreed to send a deputy to meet me there. I arrived at the clubhouse just as the patrol car pulled up. It was the same young deputy from the night of the brick incident. He looked annoyed to see me again. He wasn't bored now. The tracker in a locked building made it real. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "Positive," I said, showing him the live map on my phone. "It's in there." At that moment, the door to the pool house opened, and Brody and Kevin walked out. They weren't carrying the board. The deputy stepped out of his car. "Hold on a minute, boys." Brody's face went from smug to panicked in a heartbeat. "We were just hanging out," he mumbled. "Is that so?" the deputy said, his voice suddenly hard. "This man is reporting a stolen skateboard, and he says it's inside that building." Brody's eyes darted toward me. The pure hatred in that look was chilling. "I don't know anything about a skateboard," he lied. The deputy wasn't buying it. He had them wait by his car while he went inside. A minute later, he came out holding the decoy board. He looked at Brody. He asked Kevin for his phone. Text from Brody read, "Grab the board." "Congratulations," the deputy said. "You just texted yourself into handcuffs." The deputy's face changed. You want to try that again? That's aiding a violation of a protection order, he said. Turn around, Brody. Brody was speechless. The deputy put him in cuffs for violating a protection order and for possession of stolen property. As he was being placed in the car, his mother's SUV screeched into the parking lot. Karen Goodson jumped out, her face a mask of fury. She started screaming at the deputy, at me, threatening lawsuits, threatening to have his badge. The deputy just ignored her, closed the door, and drove away, leaving Karen standing there for the first time I had ever seen, completely and utterly powerless. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. We had proven that Brody couldn't control himself. We had proven he was a threat. And we had done it all by the book. The trap had worked. But this was just one battle. To win the war, we had to take the fight directly to the Queen. Brody's arrest was a crack in the dam, but we knew it wasn't enough to cause a flood. He was a minor. He'd get a slap on the wrist, maybe some community service. The real problem was his mother. Karen still held all the power in the HOA. She still had the support of the board, a collection of spineless yes-men who were either too afraid of her or too comfortable with their own minor perks to challenge her. The day after Brody's arrest, another email went out to the neighborhood. This time, she claimed her son was the victim of a vindictive, calculated setup by our family. She accused us of planting the skateboard and tricking her innocent boy. She was doubling down, using the HOA's official communication channels to wage her personal propaganda war. It was then that Isabel had another run-in, one that proved just how little the protection order really meant in the real world. She was in the school parking lot after a late-night study session for her finals. I was on my way to pick her up. She was walking toward the designated pickup area when a car pulled up alongside her, moving slowly. It was one of Brody's friends, the same one from the arm-wrenching incident, Kevin. Brody wasn't in the car, but the message was clear. Kevin leaned out the passenger window. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You and your psycho dads." Isabel ignored him and kept walking. The car paced her. Kevin got more aggressive. "You're going to regret this. Brody's mom is going to own you. You're going to have to move out of town when she's done with you." He was being careful not to make a direct threat, just towing the line. Isabel clutched her backpack straps, her knuckles white. She pulled out her phone and pretended to make a call. That's when the car swerved, cutting her off, blocking her path. The passenger door opened and Kevin started to get out. "What's the matter?" "Gonna call your daddy to come beat me up, too," he sneered. At that exact moment, a golf cart came zipping around the corner. It was the school's head of security, a no-nonsense retired cop named Mr. Henderson. He'd seen the car pacing Isabel from his office window. He pulled the cart right up behind their car, blocking them in, and a bright security spotlight on the roof flooded their vehicle with light. "Is there a problem here, kids?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Kevin froze, one foot on the pavement. He looked like a deer in headlights. No, sir. Just talking to a friend." "Doesn't look like friendly talk to me," Henderson said, getting out of the cart. "Miss Walker, are you all right?" Isabel just nodded, her eyes wide. "Driver, license and registration, now." I pulled into the parking lot right then. I saw the security light, the blocked-in car, and Isabel standing there. I was out of my car before it had even fully stopped. I ran to her side. "Are you okay?" She buried her face in my chest, and I could feel her shaking. Mr. Henderson handled it perfectly. He got the driver's name, the passenger's name, and called the local police to file a report for harassment. Since Kevin was one of the boys named in our original police report from the Cottonwood incident, it added another layer to the growing file. He was violating the spirit, if not the letter, of Brody's protection order by acting as his agent. When the police officer arrived, he recognized our name. "The Walkers." "Right. We've got a growing file on this situation." He took a detailed statement from Isabel and from Mr. Henderson, who was an unimpeachable witness. The officer looked at me. "Your daughter is brave," he said, "but these kids are escalating. You need to be careful." I knew he was right. We couldn't just keep playing defense, waiting for the next attack. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to take the fight to Karen's turf, the HOA itself. That night, Heather pulled out the thick binder of HOA bylaws, the document Karen Goodson used as her personal Bible and weapon. Heather had read it cover to cover a dozen times. Here it is, she said, tapping a page. Article 3, Section 4. Special meetings of the members. The rule was clear. A special meeting of the entire homeowners association could be called by the president, by a majority of the board of directors, or by a written request from a member of the board of directors petition, signed by not less than 10% of the voting membership. How many homes are in Birchfield Meadows? I asked. 247, she replied without hesitation. So, we need 25 signatures. 25 signatures to force a public meeting. A meeting where we could present our evidence. A meeting where Karen would have to face the community she ruled with an iron fist without the protection of a carefully crafted email. It seemed like an impossible task. Most people were terrified of her. But we had to try. The next day we printed out the petition forms. We made a list of neighbors we thought might be sympathetic. People who had been fined for having their trash cans out an hour too long. People who had been cited for having the wrong shade of beige on their trim. People who had their kids' basketball hoops confiscated. Karen's reign of terror had been long and wide. We just had to find the ones who were finally fed up. It was a grueling, humbling process. We went door to door. Some doors were slammed in our faces. Some people listened politely, then shook their heads. "I'm sorry," one man whispered, looking over his shoulder toward Karen's house. "I can't. She'll find a way to come after me." But then we got our first yes. It was from a young couple who had just moved in. Karen had tried to find them because their moving truck had left tire marks on the curb. They signed with angry strokes of the pen. The next was an elderly woman whose prize-winning roses were deemed non-compliant with landscape regulations. She signed. A family whose son's graduation sign was removed from their lawn because it was unapproved signage. They signed. Each signature felt like a major victory. We found that our story, Isabel's story, resonated with people. It was the ultimate example of Karen's overreach, her abuse of power trickling down to her entitled son. People were horrified. We were joined in our efforts by Uncle Dan, who knew everyone and all the neighborhood's secrets. He took us to the people who had the deepest grudges against Karen. By the end of the weekend, we had gathered not 25, but 38 signatures. We had more than enough. On Monday morning, Heather and I walked into the small HOA management office located in the clubhouse. The part-time office manager, a woman who always looked terrified, peered at us over her glasses. We didn't say a word. We just placed the stack of petitions on her desk. She looked at the signatures, her eyes widening. According to the bylaws, once the petitions were verified, the board was required to schedule a meeting within 30 days. They had no choice. We had cornered them using their own rules. We had forced a public showdown. Karen Goodson could no longer hide behind her keyboard. She would have to face us, and all the neighbors she had bullied, in a room full of people. We had the evidence. We had the support. Now, we had the venue. The stage was set for the final act. We were going to put her on trial in front of the whole neighborhood. The HOA board, with Karen at its head, did everything they could to sabotage the meeting. They scheduled it for a Wednesday night, hoping for low turnout. They sent out the meeting notice at the last possible minute, burying it in a dense, jargon-filled newsletter. But we were prepared. We, along with the other families who had signed the petition, went door to door again. This time, we weren't asking for signatures. We were handing out simple, clear flyers. Forced HOA meeting, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Come hear the truth about Karen Goodson. We made it personal. We made it unmissable. In the 2 weeks leading up to the meeting, we prepared like we were going to trial. We consulted with Mark's lawyer, who helped us understand exactly what we could and couldn't say. We couldn't show the illegal surveillance footage of our neighbors' homes, but we could absolutely use the HOA's own camera to show the crime committed on common ground. We could absolutely use Karen's own email, sent to her son from her computer, which we had from the server backup. A board member had forwarded us that same email the day after the attack. The headers matched. It was all admissible in the court of public opinion. Uncle Dan was our technical director. He helped me set up a presentation. We embedded the video file of the attack on Isabel. We took a high-resolution screenshot of Karen's email to Brody. We also prepared copies of every police report we had filed, every case number for the harassment, and a printed timeline of events that was simple, clear, and damning. We also made one more crucial move. Heather contacted the detective who had been assigned to Mark's case after the initial arrest. a sharp, seasoned officer named Detective Miller. We had met with her once before. We told her we had new evidence related to the case, significant evidence, and that we planned to reveal it at a public meeting. We told her the date and time. We also gave her a carefully worded anonymous tip about potential misuse of HOA funds and illegal surveillance being conducted through the HOA security system. We gave her just enough to get a warrant without revealing our own illegal entry. We were lighting a fuse, and we could only pray the explosion was controlled. We didn't hand over the clone. We only described what they'd find. The warrant would make the chain clean. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled. People were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Fire code nightmare. People pressed to the glass. Karen and her board sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking smug and annoyed. She clearly expected this to be a simple gripe session that she could gavel into submission. She opened the meeting with her usual condescending tone, reminding everyone of the rules of decorum and the time limits for speaking. When she called for new business, I stood up. "My name is Nate Walker," I said, my voice calm and steady, amplified by the small microphone I had brought. "My family has been the target of a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and violence, orchestrated and encouraged by our HOA president, Karen Goodson." A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. Karen banged her gavel. "Mr. Walker, this is not the forum for personal grievances. You are out of order." "I don't think I am," I said, turning to the crowd, "because this isn't just about my family. It's about how the power of this association has been abused. With the board's permission, I have a short presentation." Before she could object, one of the board members, a man who had clearly grown a conscience, spoke up. "Let him speak, Karen. Let's hear what he has to say." Defeated, Karen slumped back in her chair, her face like thunder. That was my cue. Uncle Dan, sitting in the back, hit a button on his laptop, and the projector screen behind the board flickered to life. The first thing that appeared was a photo of Isabel, smiling. Then, the video started. It was the grainy, rain-swept footage from the pool house camera. The room went silent. You could hear audible gasps as the neighbors watched Brody and his friends tie my daughter to that tree. They watched them laugh. They watched them leave her. I let the entire unedited clip play, including the timestamp that showed her being left alone in the storm for over an hour and a half. When the video ended, the room was in an uproar. People were shouting, pointing at Karen. She was beet red, trying to bang her gavel, but no one was listening. I held up my hand for silence. "That was committed on our common ground," I said, and it was just the beginning. The next image on the screen was the email, Karen's email to Brody. "It's time that girl learned a lesson. Be smart about it." I read it aloud. Heather leaned to the mic. "We didn't write those words." "Karen did." A man in back shouted, "And she billed us for the email server." Laughter cracked the tension. Then the doors swung and badges flashed. Detective Miller lifted the warrant. "This is the gavel tonight." Karen sputtered. "You can't." "We can," Miller said. "And we are." Someone started, "Recall! Recall!" The room found its spine and roared. Karen didn't. The room, which had been loud, fell into a stunned, chilling silence. It was one thing to see what her son did. It was another to see in black and white that she had ordered it. Karen stood up, sputtering. "That's fake! It's fabricated! This is a slanderous attack!" But no one was buying it. "So were my fines, Karen!" someone yelled. Laughter broke the room's chokehold. The evidence was too plain, too raw. At that exact moment, as if on cue, the back doors of the clubhouse opened. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies and Detective Miller walked in. They were holding a piece of paper, not a gavel this time, a warrant. Detective Miller walked to the front of the room. "Karen Goodson?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "We have a warrant to search these premises and to seize the HOA's digital recorders and financial records." Karen's face went white. While one deputy began disconnecting the security server from the closet, Detective Miller turned her attention to Brody, who had been sitting in the front row with his father, looking pale. "Brody Goodson, you're under arrest." She didn't list the charges, but we knew them. Unlawful restraint, stalking, witness intimidation. She cuffed him right there, in front of everyone. His father just sat there, looking defeated. As they led a crying Brody out of the room, Detective Miller handed Karen a citation. You're being cited for illegal surveillance and misappropriation of HOA funds. You'll have a date in court." The crowd erupted. It was chaos. Someone started a chant, "Recall! Recall! Recall!" A motion was made from the floor to recall the entire board of directors. It was seconded by a dozen voices at once. A vote was taken by a show of hands. It was nearly unanimous. In the space of 15 minutes, Karen Goodson's reign was over. She stood there, stripped of her power, her son in handcuffs, her crimes exposed. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a kind of bewildered hatred. She had believed she was untouchable, and in that moment, I knew the answer to that question. No one is untouchable when good people decide they've had enough. In the aftermath, Karen's house of cards fell fast. Forensics didn't just find rot, they found blueprints. Local headline, "Neighborhood of Secrets." Not subtle, accurate. A temporary board, made of the same neighbors who signed our petition, stepped in. First act, hire an auditor and a real management company. Second, a public apology to my family on the record. The law, sleepy at first, woke up hungry. With the video and Karen's email, Brody's case was clean. He pled to unlawful restraint and stalking, 2 years probation, counseling, community service until his arms ached. Karen pled no contest to illegal surveillance and embezzlement, heavy fine, restitution, 5 years probation, barred from any board, anywhere. The Goodsons listed their house and ghosted the cul-de-sac. No farewell cookies. Mark was the hard part. He did throw the punch, no way around it. But the context changed the room. His lawyer laid it out. Isabel, the rope, the storm, the email. The prosecutor read the jury pool and offered a deal, reduced to misdemeanors, time served, and anger management. Mark wanted a trial. Heather talked him down. "You were the storm we needed," she said. "Let us keep the win." He nodded. In court, he told the judge, "I'd do it again, but I'll take the class." He walked out free. A line crossed, a price paid, a father intact. Birchfield Meadows exhaled. The new board rolled back Karen's nonsense. Trash can fines, trim color crusades, the lot. Uncle Dan got dragged into being president and led like a grown-up. The first bylaw they passed locked cameras to common areas only, and opened footage to any homeowner on request. Privacy came back to the block, like rain after a brush fire. People waved again. The mailman stopped throwing side-eyes. Kids chalked the sidewalks. No one measured the chalk. Isabel changed too, not hard, strong. She skated again. She laughed without checking shadows first. Therapy did its work. The nightmares faded to memory and then to dust. One warm afternoon, I watched her step into the common area with her board. She stood at the cottonwood for a long breath, touched the bark twice with her knuckles, once for fear, once for goodbye, then pushed off. Wheels hummed, sun on her shoulders. No tremble in her stance. Mark called that night. We didn't talk long. We didn't have to. "She's good?" he asked. "She's good," I said. Silence, the easy kind, filled the line. We hung up before words got in the way. The story ended the way it should. With order, not noise. Karen's throne of vinyl and threats is gone. Brody has chores and a counselor. The board serves, not rules. Heather still sees the chessboard. Dan still has a key to every stubborn lock. Isabel owns her streets. And me? I'm still calm, quieter when things explode. We kept receipts, followed the fuse, and let the truth do what fists couldn't finish. If you ever wonder what to do when the sky turns purple, call your dad, then bring receipts.